Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Lydia Carter walked silently through the hushed corridors of the top floor of the Hotel Starlight Grand in Manhattan. Chandeliers glittered from the ceiling, reflecting off the polished parquet floor, while suite doors opened onto sumptuous interiors. She pushed her cleaning cart with almost mechanical precision, but her eyes attentively observed every detail, every movement around her. She was rarely given much attention. To most customers and even some employees, Lydia was nothing more than a shadow, a discreet and invisible cleaning lady. But behind her simple uniform and polite smile hid a silent strength and a past no one suspected. That day, Lydia felt an unusual tension in the air. In the main hall, Richard Halston, a businessman famous for his arrogance and power, laughed aloud with his colleagues, pointing at Lydia with obvious contempt. "Is she the woman who thinks she can understand us?" he snapped, his voice thick with condescension. The laughter that followed echoed through the hallway. Lydia paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. The mocking glances slid off her like drops of water on a mirror. She had learned to ignore this kind of humiliation, until she realized she had never truly been invisible. What Richard and his guests didn't know was that Lydia was more than just a housekeeper. She had studied abroad, was fluent in several languages, including Arabic, and possessed a sharp mind capable of turning any situation around. And that day, everything would change. Because sometimes appearances are deceptive, and humiliation can become the prelude to a spectacular revenge. Lydia pushed her cart along the top-floor corridor, her impeccable white gloves gliding over the polished wood. Every room she entered was meticulously inspected, the bed perfectly aligned, the towels neatly folded, every surface freed of the slightest dust. For her, it was more than a job, it was a ritual, a way of maintaining a dignity that others seemed to ignore. But today the day started badly. As soon as she entered the suite 1205, she felt the air heavy with contempt. Richard Halston, the arrogant billionaire, was there with two of his colleagues. The look he gave her was enough to let her know that she was nothing in his eyes. "Oh, it's the little cleaning lady," Richard sneered, leaning slightly towards her. "Do you really think you can touch that?" He gestured to his desk, covered with documents and a state-of-the-art computer. Both colleagues burst out laughing. Lydia stood there, her hands clenched on her cart. She'd learned to put up with this kind of behavior over the years, but there was something in Richard's tone, in that mixture of condescension and superiority, that made her feel a touch angry. "Mr. Halston, she began softly. "Don't talk," he interrupted sharply, a cruel smile on his lips. "You have no say here. You just clean up. Understand?" Laughter erupted again. The golden curtains seemed to thicken around her, trapping her frustration and dignity in a stifling silence. She took a deep breath, letting a thin, icy smile play on her lips. She wouldn't leave humiliated, not this time. She knew she had a secret Richard didn't. A skill, a know-how, and above all, a language he and his colleagues would never understand. Arabic, spoken with a fluency and precision that could change the course of this meeting. But for now, she remained polite, gently removing her cart and finishing her work. Every gesture was calculated, every movement precise. In her calm, she sensed the coming storm, and she knew she would have her revenge. After finishing her rounds in suite 1205, Lydia glided down the hallway, pushing her cart with almost mechanical precision. But her mind was no longer on cleaning, it was focused on Richard Halston and his boundless arrogance. She replayed every word, every humiliating gesture. The way he'd leaned toward her, his laughter and that of his colleagues, his authoritarian, controlling tone. Lydia felt a spark boil inside her. A cold, determined anger. In the break room, she paused, observing the other employees. Some looked away, embarrassed by Richard's behavior. Others smiled falsely, complicit in the billionaire's arrogance. Lydia knew she should be careful, but she could no longer ignore the contempt. She remembered her studies at Amman, Jordan, and the perfect mastery of Arabic she had acquired. This language, for her, was not only a tool of communication, but a subtle weapon capable of turning a situation around. She smiled inwardly. Soon, those who believed her weak would discover that she possessed an invisible strength. As she pushed her cart to the next suite, Richard reappeared in the main lobby, surrounded by new VIP guests. He spotted her immediately and approached, a condescending smile on his lips. "Still here, Lydia?" he said, his voice thick with contempt. "You should stick to your cart and not bother us with your useless efforts." Lydia stopped, her heart beating slightly faster, but her face remained impassive. She replied calmly, "Of course, Mr. Halston. I'm just doing my job." He burst out laughing, drawing the attention of the surrounding customers. Lydia felt the tension rising, but she knew this laugh was the last moment he could mock with impunity. The spark inside her became a fire ready to burn away Richard's arrogance. She continued on her way, her determination unwavering. Soon, she believed, the game would change, and those who had humiliated her would discover that beneath that outward calm lay a woman capable of turning every situation to her advantage. The day progressed in the starlight grand, but for Lydia, every minute seemed to last an eternity. Richard Halston, always accompanied by his colleagues and VIP clients, constantly observed her from a distance, looking for the slightest excuse to ridicule her. When she entered the hall to empty the trash, Richard approached with his usual arrogance, a smirk plastered on his face. "So, Lydia," he said, stopping right in front of her, "do you really think you understand what these people are doing here? These documents, this money, they're not for you, you know." He made an exaggerated gesture, as if to show her the world from which she was excluded. The colleagues laughed heartily. The customers around them looked on curiously, some amused by the humiliating spectacle. Lydia, her hands on her cart, took a deep breath and answered calmly, "I don't pretend to understand anything, Mr. Halston. I simply do my job carefully." But Richard wasn't satisfied. He wanted to push the ridicule further. "Can you repeat that for me in French? Or perhaps in Italian?" He burst out laughing, convinced that she didn't speak any foreign languages. Lydia gave a small, cold, almost invisible smile. She knew he was trying to provoke her, to unsettle her. Every word Richard said was an invitation to anger, but she refused to give in. Her mind was bubbling with strategies. In a corner of the hall, she saw Samantha, a younger colleague, who was looking at her worriedly. Samantha knew Richard had a tendency to humiliate those who seemed too quiet or too calm. But Lydia was different. She had learned to remain invisible while observing, to absorb it, and to prepare the perfect moment to turn the tables. Lydia knew she shouldn't reveal everything she knew just yet. She needed to wait for the right moment, the moment when her skill and culture would surprise Richard and the clients. And that moment would come soon. As she left the hall to continue her work, Richard threw one last barb. "Don't strain yourself too much, Lydia. Your hidden talents are not up to this world." A shiver ran down his spine, but his gaze remained calm. Beneath this provocation, only one thought echoed in his mind: soon everything would change, and he would regret every word. Evening was falling on Manhattan and the Starlight Grand was hosting a VIP reception in its main lobby. Sparkling chandeliers, immaculate tablecloths, and guests in gala attire, everything exuded luxury and sophistication. Lydia, discreetly pushing her cart, kept an eye on Richard Halston, who was reveling in his usual arrogance, surrounded by influential clients. Richard saw Lydia and, with a condescending smile, invited her to approach. "Lydia. Come here, we need your expertise." Laughter erupted. The guests turned to her, curious to see the cleaning lady humiliated live. Lydia stopped in the middle of the hall, the cart behind her. She took a deep breath, her gaze calm but piercing. Then, in a clear, confident voice, she began to speak, in perfect Arabic. The guests froze. The words she spoke weren't mere sentences, but fluent, detailed explanations of the financial and cultural documents spread out before Richard, demonstrating a depth of knowledge no one would have expected from a housekeeper. Richard blinked, mouth agape. His colleagues and clients exchanged surprised glances. Some smiled in disbelief, others murmured among themselves, fascinated by Lydia's poise and confidence. An influential customer stepped forward and said to Richard, "Excuse me, but do you know this woman? She speaks perfectly and seems very cultured." Richard stammered, unable to answer. His arrogance had crumbled in seconds. Lydia continued, explaining with finesse and precision financial and cultural details that only experts could master. Each word reinforced her invisible authority, and the entire room looked at her with respect and admiration. When she finished, she turned to Richard, her gaze fixed and impassive. "Mr. Halston, you thought I was just a cleaning lady. You underestimated what you don't immediately see." A heavy silence ensued. The guests applauded softly, then louder and louder, celebrating this unexpected display. Richard, humiliated, didn't know where to stand. His forced smiles disappeared, replaced by palpable embarrassment. That night, Lydia Carter proved that appearances can be deceptive, and that a humble person can possess the strength and knowledge to turn any situation around. After the demonstration in Arabic, the hall of the Starlight Grand was buzzing. Guests whispered among themselves, some reaching out to Lydia to ask questions, fascinated by her poise and confidence. The looks that once judged her with contempt were transformed into admiration and curiosity. Richard Halston, however, was flushed with anger and embarrassment. He tried to smile, to joke to save face, but each attempt fell flat. His usual arrogance was replaced by palpable confusion. He didn't understand how a simple housekeeper could possess such knowledge, speak fluent Arabic, and express herself with such authority in front of experts and VIP clients. A voice rose in the hall, that of an influential client. "Mr. Halston, I didn't know your employee had such a background. She seems perfectly capable of handling these matters." Richard stammered, searching for words. I think, you." But he couldn't finish. Confusion and humiliation paralyzed him. The guests exchanged astonished glances, and a few murmurs of congratulations rose for Lydia. Lydia, calm and regal, stood straight, a slight smile on her lips. She regarded Richard with an almost disconcerting serenity. Every word he had spoken to demean her was now being used against him. Samantha, her colleague, who was watching the scene from afar, whispered, "I didn't know you were capable of all this." Lydia replied with a slight wink. "You should never underestimate someone you think is invisible." At that moment, another guest, who knew Lydia by her real name and her international background, approached and confirmed her prestige and competence. Richard felt the news tighten around him. What he had thought was a simple humiliation game had turned into a spectacular turn of events in which his credibility and authority were being called into question. The murmurs turned to applause. The mocking laughter directed at her was now replaced by awestruck respect. Richard, bewildered, watched Lydia gracefully walk away, her chariot still trailing behind her, a symbol of the apparent modesty that hid immense strength. That night, everything changed. What Richard thought was power over an employee was actually a trap he'd never seen coming. Lydia Carter was no longer just a cleaning lady, she had become the central figure of the evening, admired, respected, and above all, untouchable. The next morning, the hall of the Starlight Grand was still steeped in the previous day's events. The VIP guests who had witnessed the scene couldn't stop talking about Lydia Carter. Some had sought her out to congratulate her, others to offer her unexpected career opportunities. Richard Halston, however, was still furious. He wandered the lobby, trying to regain control, but each attempt ended in failure. The murmurs of customers and employees, who had learned of Lydia's true identity and background, put him in a position he had never known: helplessness. An influential client, Mr. Thompson, an international investor, approached Lydia with a cordial smile. "Miss Carter, I am impressed. I would like to discuss with you some opportunities we could explore together." Lydia inclined her head slightly, her calm unshakable. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I'm open to talking about it." Richard, hearing these words, felt anger rise within him. He tried to intervene. "Excuse me, miss, but I think you have misunderstood your position here. Lydia turned to him, a slight, icy smile on her lips. Mr. Halston, I think you're the one who misunderstands. I'm not here to be humiliated. And I never will be. The customers present, witnessing the exchange, erupted into murmurs of approval. Richard's stature literally crumbled under the weight of his arrogance and misjudgment. Every attempt at dominance was now futile. Lydia had transformed mockery into power. She was no longer just an employee, she had become a role model, a respected and sought-after figure, capable of changing the way even the most arrogant and influential looked at her. As Lydia left the hall with her cart, she felt a mixture of satisfaction and quiet pride. The lesson was clear: underestimating someone because of their appearance or apparent status can be very costly. And Richard Halston was now about to learn this bitterly. A few days after receipt, the Starlight Grand was immersed in the usual bustle of VIP guests and staff. But the atmosphere had changed. Whispers about Lydia Carter circulated on every floor. Even employees who had ignored or mocked her were beginning to look at her differently. Richard Halston, for his part, hadn't regained his usual self-confidence. Every time he met Lydia, he felt the weight of his collapsed arrogance and his own humiliation. He still tried to fake a smile, but that mask fooled no one. One evening, in the main hall, Richard tried one last maneuver to regain control in front of the customers and his colleagues. Lydia, could you, explain these procedures to our special guest? He was pointing to an international client who, unbeknownst to him, knew Lydia from her studies abroad. Lydia approached calmly, her gaze piercing and assured. She showed neither anger nor fear. She explained every detail masterfully, first in English, then in Arabic, demonstrating a fluency and competence that captivated the audience. Her precise gestures, assured tone, and intelligent explanations made Richard turn pale. After finishing, she turned to him, icy calm. You thought you could humiliate me without consequence. You forgot one thing, Mr. Halston: underestimating someone only reveals your own weakness. The guests present applauded. The employees watching the scene understood that Lydia was not just an employee, but a person capable of controlling the situation with intelligence and dignity. Richard, flushed with shame, tried to reply, but no words came out. His arrogance had been shattered, and Lydia's every move demonstrated that she now held the moral and social power in this hall. Lydia stepped back slightly, leaving Richard to face his own defeat. This revenge was not loud, but it was complete. He had been humiliated in front of everyone, not by a violent gesture or a shout, but by the self-control, intelligence, and dignity of a woman he had believed weak. That night, Lydia Carter realized that true power lay not in wealth or arrogance, but in self-confidence, self-control, and the ability to turn humiliation into triumph. The following days, the Starlight Grand seemed different. Every VIP guest who crossed paths with Lydia no longer saw her as a mere housekeeper. Her name circulated in private lounges, accompanied by praise for her fluency in Arabic, her culture, and her ability to calmly handle delicate situations. One morning, while she was cleaning the hall, Mr. Thompson, the investor I met previously, approached with a warm smile. Miss Carter, I would like to invite you to work on a very special project. Your skills and finesse would be invaluable to us. Lydia, always humble but assured, replied. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I am honored by your trust. At that moment, Richard Halston entered the lobby. He had heard about this proposal and Lydia's newfound reputation. His face betrayed profound embarrassment. The customers present, aware of the situation, cast admiring glances at Lydia, while Richard tried to hide his humiliation. Even Lydia's colleagues, once complicit in the mockery, began to look at her differently. Some asked her questions about her life, her studies, and her skills, fascinated by the distance she had traveled from her discreet appearance to her true strength. Lydia understood then that recognition came not from wealth or the titles of others, but from the ability to demonstrate one's worth calmly and intelligently. She didn't need to shout, fight, or belittle anyone. Her competence and dignity spoke for her. Later that day, as she pushed her cart, she thought about Richard. Every word he had spoken against her, every mocking smile, every arrogant gesture, had been transformed into a springboard for his own ascension. Revenge was no longer a goal, it had become reality. Lydia Carter was no longer just respected by the guests, she had become a symbol of quiet power, knowledge and dignity, capable of changing the way the world saw her, simply by being herself. A few weeks had passed since the famous reception. Lydia Carter was no longer simply the housekeeper of the Starlight Grand, she had become a respected name among customers and employees alike. VIPs who met her now sought her advice and guidance, impressed by her language skills, culture, and unwavering composure. One morning, Mr. Thompson invited her to join a private meeting with other investors and international executives. The goal, to discuss a cultural and educational project in New York City, requiring language skills and a keen understanding of social dynamics. Lydia accepted gracefully, changing out of her usual uniform for a simple but impeccable suit. Richard Halston, watching from the lobby, felt his authority eroding daily. The customers who had once mocked Lydia were beginning to see him differently. The arrogant man humiliated by an invisible employee was now eclipsed by his competence and poise. In the lobby, Lydia passed her colleagues, who looked at her with a mixture of respect and admiration. Samantha, moved, said to her, "I can't believe how much you've accomplished, and all while being yourself." Lydia smiled, with a sweetness full of pride. "This isn't about revenge, Samantha. It's about showing your worth, no matter what others think." The transformation was complete. Lydia hadn't just earned respect, she'd created real opportunities for herself. She could now interact with investors, international clients, and executives, while continuing to work at the hotel, but with a status that made her a key figure. Richard Halston, meanwhile, saw his reputation tarnished and his dominance eclipsed. The woman he had thought insignificant had not only overcome his arrogance, but she had also established a new balance of power within the hotel and among the guests. Lydia had proven that true strength lies in dignity, competence, and patience. And now, every step she took brought her closer to a future where she would never again have to hide behind a uniform. Her talent and intelligence spoke for herself. The Starlight Grand had never been more alive. VIP clients were still discussing Lydia Carter, the housekeeper who had defied all expectations and risen to the status of a respected and admired figure. Her name was now circulating in influential Manhattan circles, no longer as an invisible employee, but as a person of exceptional value and competence. Richard Halston, publicly humiliated, tried to regain his confidence, but every attempt failed. Even his colleagues and clients now looked at him with distance. The arrogant billionaire had been outshined by an employee he believed to be insignificant. Lydia, for her part, had found a perfect balance. She continued her work with the same care and attention to detail, but now every gesture was recognized and respected. Opportunities multiplied, invitations to conferences, collaborations with international investors, and proposals for cultural and educational projects. One evening, as she was leaving the hotel after a busy day, she spotted Richard in the lobby. He looked down, unable to speak. Lydia gave him a small smile, neither malicious nor vengeful, just calm and assured. That simple gesture summed it all up. She had won not through confrontation, but through self-control, dignity, and intelligence. She thought about how far she'd come, the mockery, the humiliation, the contempt. Every obstacle had been a lesson, every condescending look a reminder that she had to prove her worth and never give up. And she had done it with grace. Lydia Carter was no longer the woman they tried to humiliate. She had become a symbol of quiet strength, competence, and respect, capable of transforming fear and condescension into admiration and opportunity. And in that luxurious hall, beneath the twinkling lights, Lydia knew that nothing and no one could ever extinguish her. She had proven to everyone that true power lies neither in wealth nor in arrogance, but in dignity, knowledge, and the ability to remain oneself, even in the face of the greatest obstacles.